Thank you all so much for joining us this afternoon to talk about local advisory panels for transitional instruction. We're so happy to have you. My name is Ginger Reynolds. I am Senior Fellow at Education Systems Center. My colleague, Heather Penzak, is also here to help. Heather, good wave. Awesome. Today, I'll provide you with a quick background and overview of transitional instruction and the basics of local advisory panels. And then you'll hear some promising practices and lessons learned from Sauk Valley Community College and Illinois Central College. We're thankful for having them. After that, we'll have plenty of time for questions and discussion. So if you're here, it's likely that you're familiar with transitional instruction, so I won't spend a ton of time explaining it, but just to orient your brain, in case you had a fabulous lunch and are trying to remember why it is you signed up for this session, here's some background. Transitional instruction is derived from the Post-Secondary and Workforce Readiness Act, legislation that was developed over multiple years with the leadership from the state's P20 Council. It was enacted in 2016. So there are 4 overall components in the law establishing the post-secondary and career expectations framework, the pilot for competency-based high school graduation requirements, and the statewide system for college and career pathway endorsements. There also was an understanding that to bolster college and career readiness required supporting students to successfully transition to college and on to career. So the law provides for transitional instruction in the 4th year of high school to smooth the transition to college and to reduce remediation rates. The process is generally to identify juniors who are not college ready in a subject area, support readiness through transitional instruction in the senior year, and based on successful course completion, provide guaranteed placement into college level courses. The results are that students transition directly into college level coursework, which increases their chances of completing a certificate or degree, and that underrepresented groups have more and better access, which helps address our equity goals. There are various policy drivers of transitional instruction that are set out in state and federal law. Full statewide transitional math implementation is required by school year 21-22, unless the local school board opts out through a process that's also laid out in the law. There's no implementation requirement for transitional English, but there are other drivers, including Illinois' ESSA College and Career Readiness Indicator, which includes both transitional math and transitional English, and the multiple measures placement framework, which has been adopted by the state's community college system. And that includes both transitional math and transitional English as options for student placement. As a quick update on transitional English, the course parameters, competencies, and general policies document was adopted by ISB, ICCC, and IBHE in January, and we are preparing for a fall 2021 statewide portability panel. So for a quick overview of portability and partnerships. So portability is a key part of the transitional instruction system. It indicates that a transitional course meets state requirements and has been vetted against statewide expectations. Students who receive a C or better get a transitional course portability code on their transcript, which means they place directly into college level coursework at all Illinois community colleges and any accepting universities without a placement test. Portability means placement goes with the student. A statewide portability panel reviews and approves coursework to ensure it's in line with the state policies and requirements, similar to what the Illinois Articulation Initiative provides for coursework that can transfer from community college to the Illinois university system. The process ensures quality control, verifies that competencies and policies are met, and translates into placement at all community colleges across the state, as well as any participating universities. So for a course to be eligible for portability, feeder districts and local community colleges together establish a local advisory panel and a local partnership agreement. The local partnership agreement governs the relationship between high schools, and community colleges, and the local advisory panel is the key intermediary between the high school community college partnership and the statewide portability panel. We've learned through the experience of transitional math that the local advisory panel is crucial in making transitional instruction work. In a local partnership agreement, the district and college agree to collaboratively establish transitional courses. Transitional courses are different from dual credit courses in key ways, including that the course is a high school and not a college level course, and that high schools and community colleges are equal partners in the process. The local partnership agreement sets out a grading and assessment structure that conforms to state guidance. It lays out the appropriate college course for students who get a C or better in their transitional course. It's an agreement to pursue and maintain portability. It outlines a process for resolving disputes, and it names administration contacts. The Local Advisory Panel, or LAP, has several important functions. Its responsibilities include collecting syllabi and competency spreadsheets from high schools, approving the course, choosing courses for portability submission, and communicating information from the statewide portability panel to school administration. Due to the importance of local course review, transitional course policies require that the LAP has equal representation from feeder high schools and the local college constituents. The recommended structure includes at least one administrator and one content, English or math, teacher representing high schools in the partnership, as well as at least one administrator and one content faculty member representing the college. So today we'll hear from two community colleges, Sauk Valley and Illinois Central, about their local advisory panels. It is my pleasure to introduce Janice Jones from Sauk Valley Community College and Joe Bergman, Arnitria Shaw, and Elizabeth Carrico from Illinois Central College. And maybe ask Janice if you would start us off by introducing yourself and give us a little information about your position, and then tell us about your LAP.
Okay, so I'm Janice Jones, and I am a retired faculty member from the college, but have kept on my position as the College and Career Readiness Facilitator. So I'm doing all things that connect between our local high school districts and the college, which includes transitional math. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about our LAP. It may be quite different than yours. I find that sometimes we're a very small community college with a lot of rural feeder districts. And so sometimes that changes the way things happen. And so just keep that in mind. We've been working on transitional math for probably 5 years. We started with a group of high school folks who said, let's get to work on this, as we knew it was coming down the road. And so we would meet every month or two and try and consider what was needed, what were some of the pitfalls between students from high school coming into college with some success. So the members, so we worked through this. Basically, we decided to work on the quantitative literacy and stats curriculum, because that's what our feeder schools wanted. The majority of our schools wanted that curriculum. So we decided to focus on that. And we worked for a couple of years and created a curriculum, used the competencies, built it out, and we're lucky enough to have the state accept that as the state curriculum. So our team can say, well, I will say with great pride that their work has been accepted at the state level. So that has given us a leg up in our area on transitional math and understanding that process, because many of our high school faculty were involved in that. So when it came time for portability, what we did was we said, okay, we're going to take these team members who've done the work and who understand the process and put them on our LAP. So we have two of our high school faculty members, our college math chair, I serve on it, our professional learning person from the director of professional learning from our ROE, all of us serve together on this LAP. And what we decided, and we were very upfront about this in the process, was we wanted districts, if you wanted to say, you needed to be in the process. And so we had several districts then who said, yes, we'll help with this work. And we're involved in that. And we had some districts, of course, who said we can't or we don't want to. So when it came time for us to think about portability, we said we have vetted and worked hard for this QL process in this QL curriculum. And so we encourage everyone to use this. And so all of our districts who are doing QL stats and have applied for portability have used that curriculum that is now the state curriculum. So it's made that process for portability very easy for us, because when a district comes in and says, we want to offer QL and we're going to use this state curriculum, we know all about it. And so we can make sure that they understand that as well. So it's made it easy on our end. As we look at then other pieces, other pathways, the tech math, we also know our Director of Professional Learning, Angie Garza from the ROE, has been involved in the state development of those curriculum pieces. So we know that the state has done a great job in providing curriculum. And so when it comes to what schools want to do, we press hard to say, this is what you should do, because we feel it's vetted and is quality curriculum. So we haven't had a school who's come in and said, here's my course and I want to teach it this way. And so we've been really lucky so far. That is on our horizon. We have a school who says this is what we're going to do. So it's going to be a new process for us. But what we have done in order to make it easier for our districts is that we have created a template. We've created a process for them to go through, a spreadsheet of, okay, here are the competencies, you put your units in there, you talk about where all of the competencies are embedded, so that when it comes to us as an LAP, we can easily look for things that are missing or things that we don't understand. So we have tried to lay as much out as we can and make it as uniform as possible. Not because it's a huge control thing for us, it's not, it's just it's easier. It's easier for districts who have been listening to us talk about transitional math for 5 years and are going, transitional math, I have to offer transitional math? I got one of those calls today, sorry. It just makes that whole process much easier for our districts as they start to think about it. So promising practices, things that we've learned along the way, that whole template piece has really made it easier for our districts. And so it's made it easier for us. I reach out every spring to our districts and say, what are you doing for transitional math? So that I have a heads up knowing what's going to come my way or what they're thinking. And that way I can provide them with the right kind of resources and point them in the right direction. We have had lots of workshops and offered PD because we're in partnership with our local ROE, PD for teachers to come, for administrators to come. We've stipended teachers who went to the state training. We've tried to make it as easy as possible for folks to get the information. And I would just, what have we learned through this process? Oh, what have we learned? It's a lengthy process. Okay, we developed the QL curriculum and ours was submitted 4 times before it was accepted. So that's a whole nother conversation. But what we have found is that sometimes the state panel, the information they give you is very succinct and is not detailed enough for us to really understand what they want and where we've fallen short. And so I think it's essential that you ask, can you give me more details, and reach out in that way. So, and I would say in your first submission, more is better. Err on the side of more. Just then you're kind of, I guess, trying to make sure all your ducks in a row, and then you've added a few more ducks. It's not a bad thing. And it's a continual learning process. It's continually, for us, a learning process. It's a continual learning process for our districts. And just when you think you have an answer, somebody's going to throw you a question that you're like, wow, that I haven't even thought about. So that's kind of our process. We don't meet very often, but we give our districts a deadline. If you are not going to follow this state curriculum, we need to see this, by a certain date. And then our panel can meet and review, and we can send it back for any changes that need to be made so that we can still meet the state deadlines. And I think the more clear you are, the clearer you are about that, the more you lay that out, it's going to be easier for your districts to work with you.
Thanks so much, Janice. Really, really appreciate that. And I know probably lots of folks will have some questions and be looking for some more information, but let's hear from Illinois Central first. So Joe, could you start us off, introduce yourself and your colleagues, and let us know a little about your process?
Sure. I am Joe Bergman. I'm the Dean of Math Science Engineering at Illinois Central College. And I brought along a couple people today. I have Elizabeth Carrico, who's a math faculty, and she's also my transitional math coordinator. One of the things we learned along the way. And then I have also Dean Arnitria Shaw from our early college, which again is another thing that we learned that was helpful along the way. So I'll go kind of over a little bit of a overview of how we about, and then I'll have Elizabeth and Arnitria talk about their components as it relates to our transitional math. We started probably 8 years ago with 8 or 9 years ago with the Bridging the Gap grant. That was before my time as dean, but I kind of inherited that project, and we were working with using our mathematical literacy course in some high schools to as a QL stats pathway, if you will, to transition directly into our general education transfer level math courses. And we learned a lot in that process before the act was even a law. So we took some advantage of that experience. And then when the PW Act came about, we hit the ground running. The biggest thing that I think we did that was really beneficial from the beginning, I'm not sure if you know, we're in Peoria, and we have 30 plus high schools that we work with. So we wanted to get buy-in from high schools, and for the MOU, before there was a state MOU, we brought all those high school people in to talk about the transitional math and what components we were going to do there, and negotiated some things like extra credit, grading scales, all those kinds of fun things, classroom size, that are very different when you have districts. In our district too, community college district, we have like Peoria Public Schools, which is a very large district, to medium-sized schools, and then rural schools. So again, everybody has a little bit different take on how this impacts them and what they can do. So it was important to get all those voices in one room. They didn't all show up the first time, but we probably had 20 plus schools in the beginning that took an active component in establishing our MOU. And then from that, we kind of, like Janice said, we managed to take some of those people more involved and suggest that maybe they would help out with the LAP. It was kind of one of those situations where the few people just didn't step forward, but they weren't fast enough to step backwards. So we did get them involved. We have 6 members on our LAP, 3 obviously community college, and then 3 from the high school. And it was important for us to be intentional to have a large school district representation, a small school district representation, and then that medium size. So we have 1 of each, but we wanted to keep the LAP kind of small because we didn't know what the heck we were doing. And so we wanted to be less people confused, as opposed to a lot of confusion there. We started with our LAP probably about a little over a year ago, maybe a year and a half, having those conversations, trying to figure out what we were doing. We did have a little bit of an advantage because one of the members from the LAP is on the state LAP panel. or state panel, excuse me, portability panel. So had a little insight into what the expectations were, from their perspective. We started off, this has evolved. We started off with, we would send out the high school information to the LAP members. And then I created kind of a little rubric for them to evaluate the material. Unfortunately, we didn't have any kind of uniformity with respect to everybody wants to use the state materials. I think for the most part, a lot of state materials weren't even in existence when we started. But the rubric kind of at least gave them a format to try to review the materials. And then they all brought that information with them and we met physically on campus. Remember when we were able to do that? We could actually be in the same room. And if anybody knows me, all these meetings involve food. So, it gets a good chance of there being a greater attendance. And we were able to hash out what we were looking for, what our expectations were. After everybody had a chance to review, some of the submissions from the high schools, and then also being able to, pick the brain of our state panel member. And we were fortunate enough to submit for the QL stats and the STEM pathway and get acceptance for both of those. I had been pushing from the very beginning that the QL stats pathway is probably the most appropriate for the majority of our schools, because most of our schools already have a very capable path for STEM. But what we were really looking for were those students that they made it through that state requirement for math, but didn't have a desire to go on in math. And so this provided them with another pathway. So, I mean, if you were a student saying, hey, do I take pre-calc or not math? A lot of them were just choosing not to take math. And so this allowed them to be able to have a course that applied the math concepts, kept them fresh, allowed them to be able to be successful when they came to us and not have that gap year. That was kind of the premise behind our Bridging the Gap grant that we were working off of from the beginning. And also, again, with a lot of smaller school districts, they don't have the instructional resources to have a set group of students that are going to do this STEM pathway, as well as the QL Stats pathway, and so on. So I think most of the high schools have adopted that. We do have a couple that did go the STEM route, which is fine. Nothing wrong with that. But again, we had that flexibility. We've not had any submissions for the technical math pathway yet, so I don't have any advice on that pathway. But part of our selling point with the QL Stats pathway was that obviously anybody that gets through the transitional math course for that, they automatically get into the technical math. And so again, from a population standpoint, that was the middle of the road. Everybody was pretty happy, with that. The LAP has evolved with respect to how we meet. Obviously, some of this had to do with the pandemic, but also just, again, as we learned more from our process, we still send out individual emails that have a high school submission associated with it. But then now, instead of doing things on paper, we've moved everything to electronic using Google Forms. We're able then to collect that information. We have modeled everything based off of the II concept of either they get a full conditional approval or we return it back to them. And then the other feature that has been extremely beneficial is what Elizabeth's going to talk about, is I learned that I can't manage all these high schools by myself. So I added Elizabeth Carrico, who's a math faculty, to work with the individual high schools as they're doing their submissions. So that's been a tremendous benefit. And then the other aspect is Arnitria works as the dean of our early college. And a lot of our high schools have adopted the idea of doing a semester TM course, and then that second semester transitioning into dual credit. So it was important that we had that relationship with our early college office to be able to make that transition as smooth as possible. And then the last thing I'll say before I turn it over to Elizabeth is one of the things that, again, learned the hard way is in our MOU, we basically require every transitional math student to apply to ICCC. That was important for us because in the beginning, we were trying to keep track of the information that we need to report to the state, but also just to be able to make sure these students are getting into the transfer level courses that they should now be allowed to. So by having them apply, it's a free application, it takes about 5 minutes maybe to fill out. We can then assign them a student ID number. And when they pass their transitional math course, because it's not a credit bearing course, we put them into a group. And that group is then assigned to our prerequisites for those courses. And so then that student can seamlessly register for the appropriate courses because they've already met the prerequisites based off that group. And then we can pull group data whenever we need to see how success rates are going, report that information to the individual districts to say, hey, your transitional math class is actually working really well and your students are having success, or we're seeing some difficulties. Let's have a discussion about where those gaps are so that we can try to bridge those gaps so we do have the student success. So I'll stop there and I'll turn it over to Elizabeth and she can talk about her role and how it's evolved over the time that she's had it.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Elizabeth Carrico. I started teaching at ICCC in 2000, so I've been a math professor for quite some time. I was drawn to this transitional math coordinator position in addition to teaching duties because I had taught our math literacy class, which is what Joe mentioned was the kind of the bridging the gap class. And it was that, pathway for the student who really didn't want to take 2 semesters of algebra again before they got into their gen ed math which is all they needed to graduate. So I enjoyed that class very much. And when I saw this come forward and I saw the idea of transitional math, it was very intriguing to me. Plus the idea of getting out and talking to people about math, like that's exciting. So as the time has progressed, so I believe I got this position, the year has just kind of disappeared. I believe, Joe, it was June of 2019. Is that when so I started this position June of 2019. And we started with the idea that I would help transition these high schools, or 30 plus high schools into transitional math. There were some experts who had been doing it for a while, and there were people who, as Janice said, also did hold on a second, transitional math, is that a thing? Is that still around? Yes, it's still around. So that's how we started, and we originally envisioned the project as me physically getting in my car and driving to every high school. And we, something happened last spring, not sure what, that caused me to stop doing that. So I stopped visiting high schools, but then I found that high school teachers really were more likely to really open up electronically than they were if I was standing in front of them. So it became an interesting transition communication wise to talk about their issues, developing the course, going through with the course, assessing the course. So I found communication wise that electronically checking in often, like Janice said, checking in often is really key, just making sure they don't ever forget that there is support here, that I'm here for them, and however I can help them wherever they are in the journey has been really useful for me. So primarily, I serve to help get them onto the transitional math train, and then as a bit of a ombudsman, a bit of a go-between between the high school and the LAP for communication. So I'll turn it over to Arnitria.
All right, thank you. I'm Arnitria Shaw. I'm the Dean of College and Career Readiness, and my office plays more of a role when it comes to working with students that we know are planning to not just transfer to our institution, but other institutions as well. And that key of college readiness, we all watch the numbers of developmental students, rise. And we were able to, over the course of several years, all sort of realize that we had students who were taking this gap year from math, sort of as like a respite. I'm math phobic myself. So, we had students who then would take either the placement test or come in and find themselves lacking what they needed to go into the programs they wanted to go into. And even just the self-esteem impact of being placed into a developmental class for some of our students. So we began working really closely with the counselors, high school counselors, who we already had a relationship with through dual credit, and treated this opportunity as almost another non-dual credit / dual credit opportunity to get students ready so that once they arrived at our doors, they'd be ready to pursue the programs that they were interested in. So I have an early college coordinator, Lisa White, and we have regular contact with all of the high school counselors, superintendents, and principals. So oftentimes we'll process questions about, so how does this translate, or will this set this particular student up to be an engineer? One of the scary things and a positive thing at the same time that's happening is high school counselors are starting to become more college advisors, and college advisors are starting to have to understand a lot more about what happened in high school so that there is that seamless transfer. And it's been good to see students able to avoid some of those confusing potholes because we've been able to talk about it. There are some students who are well aware of what their math status is, even junior year in high school, sophomore year in high school, and have it mapped out in their head that, okay, this is the path I'm going to take. We also facilitate that dual credit enrollment. So if we have a student in one of our districts who is taking that fall transitional math course, our office handles the registration of that student into a dual credit course and gives that student a little bit of a boost in feeling that they've been able to get math under their belt, while for many of them, they still have some support from the high school as well as access to the college supports. But two, once again, it prevents, even if it's just a semester, it prevents that semester off from math, so that when you show up and you're doing things in chemistry and other areas, you don't have that lost, aptitude for math because you haven't touched it in 6 to 18 months. So the communication goes very well. We're in contact regularly. We do have fall and spring counselor meetings, and both Joe and Elizabeth have come to the meetings. And I noticed the questions have started to decrease. Like originally, 2 years ago, I know Joe probably felt like he was being held hostage by the high school counselors by the number of questions that were coming in. But now I would say the majority of our districts and the schools we serve, they have a grasp on it now. And they know that when they're looking for that content expertise, that Joe and Elizabeth are the people to talk to. When they're talking about more so that I'm working with a student, we're trying to map out his next 2 years, then early college is the office they should come to. And we're in communication all the time as well, just to make sure that we're aware, because we do realize in working with the high schools, they don't always know who to call. So we have to stay in the loop with each other so that if I get a call that should go to Elizabeth, I can either answer the question or I know where to forward it, and vice versa. So it's going really well, in my opinion. I can say that because I feel like Joe and Elizabeth do the very heavy lifting of putting everything in place. But I feel we work really well together as a team, in that I always feel like I have updated information to provide to the schools in terms of how we're going to address transitional math.
Great. Thank you all so much. I noticed that there was a question in the chat. Is the transition course for your district a one semester course? And Joe responded that ICC has both. And so I wonder if, Janice, if you want to jump in, and then Joe, if you have any more to say about it, please jump in.
All of our districts are doing a full year of transitional math.
Joe, how's it working to have both?
It's exciting. it keeps us on our toes. I've even had, I think, 2 schools that have reached out to see if they could potentially have both opportunities within their school, for maybe some of the stronger students. They only do a 1 semester and be able to go transition right into an early college course, and then for some of the students that they know are going to need more time to have a full year program. So I don't think we have anybody actually done that yet. They said, hey, can we do this? Do we have to commit to one or the other? And from my perspective, and I think this is the same for, I don't want to speak for our math faculty, but I think from our meetings and stuff, they want students to be ready when they come to ICC to take their course. And so if that's a semester or if that's a year, whatever it takes, that's what they want. So we try to make it as flexible as possible, to try to meet their needs.
I can also add to that I just recently finished working with one of our largest partner districts in putting together their strategic plan for the next 3 to 5 years. And that idea came up in terms of customizing student learning, looking at having what we would call slow math, in that it moved at a slower pace. So for some students, having that 1 semester is going to be just fine. But there's some students who, their feedback, we had student panels, they would say things like, if the class would have moved just a little bit slower, I would have caught on. But by the time I caught on, we were moving on to the next thing. So I do think too that the fact that we offer both, it gives the schools the opportunity to, either speed up, as Pace says, speed up or catch up, whichever one works best for that student. And every year we have our early college partnership agreements and planning agreements come in. And that is how we determine who is offering it. They let us know, and, we pass that information on and make it part of our scheduling activities, just so that we're aware of it.
I was going to say there one other, I think best practice or whatever that we had, that they kind of, Elizabeth and Arnitria have alluded to, but when we started those initial meetings, we were writing the schools, we challenged them to bring a school counselor, a math teacher, and an administrator. So again, they were all hearing the same message at the same time. And that has actually helped out tremendously, I think, because again, it's not the math person coming and then trying to explain maybe some of the things that are not mathy to the counselor or to the administrator. And then we'd have different breakout sessions for the different groups so that they could talk more about what they really were concerned about. But again, making sure that everybody across the board at the high school had at least some representation, and then could take it back to the other fellow counselors or administrators or math faculty, which again, I think was very beneficial.
Great, thanks. We also have a question. We heard in this morning's plenary that change happens at the pace of trust. So sort of get to what you were speaking to, Joe, a second ago. To what extent did your LAP build from existing trust building relationships between your district and college, or did your LAP need to build new trust between the district and the college? Maybe Janice, you want to jump in? Joe, I know that you armed people with lunch, so I thought that was brilliant.
Well, and again, I think the MOU exercise that we did, I think was where we really built our trust with the districts, because it did not seem like it was a top down, here's what we're doing, here's the rules. I mean, we really did sit in a big room and negotiate, again, what's an appropriate class size for this transitional math class? How's the grading scale going to work? Are we going to allow makeups or not makeups, but redos on tests, and those types of things that maybe some school districts, they have a policy where students can't get a 0. If you show up and you put your name on your paper, you get a 60%. That's not helping students that are transitioning to college. And so again, we had to say, okay, here's what this is our goal, is to try to move them from point A to point B. And we did it together. And so I think that, again, it didn't seem like, if you will, Joe was saying, this is what it is, sign on or don't. I think that's where we built that. And again, coming back from the idea that we all want to help our students, whether they're high school students or the students that become our college students, working together. It's not a us versus them. And when we do provide data, it's not meant to be, if it's not positive data, it's not meant to be a negative in the sense you're doing a bad job. We have found some very interesting conversations about, I didn't realize that you teach it this way, or you expect them to know the 3 different ways to do something as opposed to just the one I've been showing them, or that's not how I represent, that's not my notation that I use, or a lot of them are simple fixes, but again, they're things that we were able to then, with this trust between math faculty, and say, we're not pointing fingers, we're not blaming somebody for not doing something. Let's figure out where the gap is so that we can, again, help all our students be successful.
Thanks, Joe. Janice?
I would echo much of what Joe said. When we all got together, none of us on either side knew a whole lot, right? And so we were in the process through the weeds together. And when you come out the other end, there's trust. And so that really, helped us. It didn't look like it was coming from the community college to the schools or vice versa. And I think the process, as we worked on our curriculum, having math faculty from the college there who went, what? Really? And had, we found there was a great divide between what was happening in math classes in the high school and some of their procedures and what was going on at the college. And so it was very enlightening on both sides for them to go, well, no wonder, right? And so that through the whole process has really been great. And so I think the idea that on the college side we learned, and on the high school side we all learned, and we were in the process together, really helped us to say that we had some trust. And then those folks who are late to the party are just so flustered that they don't care if we tell them what to do. They're just like, I have to have transitional math this fall. So, if we can put something in their hands, then they're just relieved.
Great, thanks. We also had a question about how many feeder high schools are you both working with at this point?
Well, we have 17 feeder high schools. Not all of them are offering transitional math this year. We have three doing QL stats. We have 1 doing tech math. And so we have a lot of schools who will be coming on. We also have we have a couple of schools who offered transitional math, but have not been able to fill a class. So that's a whole nother piece in the small rural school area. And, honestly, who's monitoring that? I can never answer that with any kind of honesty, although we do try and help these districts problem solve. So if you can't fill a class, what are some of your options? How do we not leave these 2 or 3 students behind?
Great.
This is real terrible for me to say because we have, I believe, around 30 public high schools that feed into ICC. And the reason why I say around is because I look at all the high schools, and we've actually invited a lot of the private schools because they were interested and they want to have their students have the same opportunity. And so I don't sometimes think about counting the actual numbers of individual high schools based off of public or private. I just know we have 30 plus, and it's a lot of work, but it's good work that is translating, I think, into some awesome outcomes for our students. Arnitria probably knows the exact numbers.
As of this moment, we have 22 high schools who have an MOU with us, and 11 of them have portability.
Great, thanks. What I want to get in this question before the very end. What are you doing next? What is your next step? What's not done yet that is the next thing?
Well, I can answer that one because we're actually going to put on a transitional math summit for the teachers in high schools in our area because we have folks who are, again, struggling and thinking about what are we going to do? And so we're going to continue to provide that instruction and that PD to try and help them through that process. So that's what's next on our radar.
We have been offering math summits for quite a while. We offered them in January for a couple Januaries, and then we've moved pretty much everything to June so that it works out a little bit for the teachers. We have not had two that have been the same, because the first one we did one way, the next one we did a little bit different. The third one is now COVID restricted. There's all these different things. So we're trying things to work for different people. Elizabeth has done a great job of creating her own resources website for our teachers, in which that provides them a platform to be able to share project between different high schools. And so that educating people with respect to that resource is out there, as well as some sample submissions from high schools, so they know what to expect when they go to submit for their portability. Those are some of the things that we've been doing. From my perspective, that we're just trying to get the schools that are still, if this is going to actually have to come true or not, that they've been dragging their feet a little bit, getting them on board. And then we have a kind of it's a tangential project, but we're looking at, we've been developing with Skyward, is the student information system that a lot of our high schools use. And so we've been working with Skyward in our PeopleSoft system to incorporate electronic transfer of high school transcripts into our system. So again, just providing a more seamless, less hands-on way of being able to transfer the data and allow students to be able to register within our system. And then we can always report out, from our system. So right now, our Arnitria and her team, they take the grade rosters that the high schools provide, and then they enter that data kind of manually into our system. So our goal is to, as we increase more and more high schools, more and more students, that becomes a bigger and bigger job. And I know Lisa already had a job before her transitional math started. So we're trying to minimize from that point as well.
And I would say from the early college side, from the early college office side, we're really looking at helping the counselors and the high school administration understand the significance of this. When we talk about not being able to fill a class and situations like that, especially from high schools where then, when those students arrive, we still have students placing it into the developmental courses, just trying to stress that importance of good guidance, from the very beginning of high school to plan what the next steps are in terms of a student's math pathway. If a student is thinking about doing XYZ as a major in college, or even in a CTE program, how much of an impact that what they do in high school math, how much of an impact that has on what they decide next. We do some college advising in the early college office, and the saddest thing is when you have a kid who comes in and they have this goal of maybe a STEM career, but the math that they've taken has not set them up to be able to do that. And you take a kid who has possibly avoided math, maybe said, I finished 3 years, I don't ever want to see math again. And now you're telling them they have to take those additional classes at a college level or in college to pursue their dreams. I heard someone once say, developmental math is where college dreams go to die. So I'm not sure that's true, but for a lot of students, that's, you say that word and that's it. So just the opportunity to take away some of that fear and anxiety that students have while they're still in the comfort of their high school, and then, usher them over into the college side, be it a semester program, a semester class, or a year-long class. It sets them up better for that post-secondary transition.
Great. Thank you. I'm going to ask, I'm watching our time. I know there are a couple more questions, and I know maybe we can get to some transitional English information, but I would please ask that you take a minute. I think Heather's going to throw the link to Google Doc into the chat. If you would let us know what you're doing, what questions you have. We're developing a best practice document that we hope to get out by the end of the year-ish, and we would love to be guided by the questions that you have and also include any best practices, lessons learned that you have. So it would be great help to us if you'd go to that link and give us your thoughts. And also, please also leave your contact information so I can get back to you if I need some more information. I think, Heather, you were going to maybe ask Janice to say a little bit about where we are with transitional English at the moment.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I know I see some English faces on the line here who are looking to develop their LAPs for that kind of like new and emerging work for some spaces for sure. So Janice, would just love to hear, and your ICC team too as well, what you're thinking and what you're planning and putting together for English.
So we have been funded by ICCB for a couple of years to do some transitional ELA piloting. So we have, much like our transitional math, we're following that same pattern. We actually have worked in the past 12 months with 10 different districts to start to develop, to look at the competencies, to try and figure out what that means in curriculum, to try and again, we're in the midst of the weeds and trying to figure out what a unit might be like, and to put some curriculum together. So we spent 2 weeks last summer working through those pieces, that understanding, trying to get some knowledge, foundational base, and then started throwing out some ideas for curriculum, and we will continue that this summer. And I will say it's so interesting because schools now know that transitional math is not just a pipe dream of John first, sorry, John, calling you out there, but it is a reality. And so I have had several emails within the last 2 weeks of, what's our transitional ELA implementation date? So now it's on their radar. And so that might make it a little bit easier to get our districts on board with transitional ELA.
Wonderful. Thanks. Thank you all for your great questions and your attention to this topic. It's coming, it's very important, and we're really, really happy to have had ICC and Sauk Valley to talk us through some of it. Be on the lookout for our document. Please go to the Google Doc, let me know what you need to know, and enjoy the rest of your day and the rest of the conference. Feel free to reach out to me if you have other particular questions that I can find answers for. Until then, until later, thanks so much. Have a great day.